This week, I'm chatting with Jason Hardrath. Most days, an elementary school teacher from Bonanza, Oregon, but also the record holder of over 100 FKTs. Yes, 100. In an episode last year, he shared his stories of these crazy summer picnics, combining swimming through lakes, bicycling to trailheads, and rock climbing to summits in Yosemite and other beautiful places. This week, he's back with his summer project for 2021, the Washington Bulgers, in just 50 days. The Bulgers are the 100 highest mountain peaks in Washington state. Most require some combination of glacier travel, scrambling, technical rock climbing, bushwhacking, and insanely long approaches. He did it all in just 50 days. Hope you have your Snickers bars ready. You will need it for this episode. Thank you so much for jumping back on and making this happen. Love it.
I'm excited too. Yeah, it was a good chat last time.
I actually looked, and it's been like almost a year, just over a year actually, when you were on last time.
Wow, it's been that long already.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
Yeah, I guess so. It would have been right after I did the Yosemite picnic, right?
Correct, exactly. You blew us away last time with that story, because I never even heard of that word picnic before, and so I was like super fascinated by it. And so this time you've done something completely different and even crazier.
I guess you could say that, yeah.
Well, you did very much inspire me last time, because if my calculations are correct, when we posted the episode last time, like about a month later, I established this route in the Olympics that I had been looking at for years and trying to piece together Mount Washington, Mount Eleanor, Mount Rose, Mount Copper, and Cap Peak. And I was lucky to have found this connected trail, so it wasn't all bushwhacking the entire way. But yeah, it was like incredible run that we did in late September last year.
Oh man, that makes me smile. Awesome.
Yeah, no, it was super cool. Of course, it was like an only known time, because that's the only way we could establish something like this. But it's been cool, because it's living in Olympia. It's sort of such a prominent line, and Mount Eleanor is such a popular hike, and Mount Rose is low in elevation, so you can climb it almost all year long. And so people really love these mountains, are very familiar with it. And once I sort of established this connection, several people have reached out to me and asked about various components or trying to do the whole thing. So it's been fun sort of to establish this and then become sort of the custodian of that route, if you will. I wonder if you have a similar experience. Do people reach out to you? I mean, with Bulgers, of course, but with some of the ones that you've did that perhaps not many people have heard of, what's the feedback that you're getting?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I get it's been phenomenal. I mean, not all of them, but there's a decent number that have gotten quite a bit. I've gotten hit up quite a few times, and they've gotten redone quite a few times. Which is exactly what I hoped for. Yeah. I like the sort of the caretaker of the route, or the custodian, as you said. I love that element of it when you establish something. And so people are like, hey, I want to try this. What can you tell me about it?
Yeah, exactly. That's been really fun. It goes both ways. It's fun when you give advice. And a few weeks ago, two ladies who are super strong runners attempted actually that Cushman 6 route, and they actually got stuck and had to spend the night up on Copper, and so they had not so great of a time on that peak. And so afterwards I felt a little bit bad. I'm like, oh man, did I like oversell it, make it sound too easy, too approachable? So I went back to all of my documentation, make sure that that I had the right kind of verbiage in.
Yeah, that is a huge element of it, and I've gotten way more conscious of that with routes that I create, only known times on, or routes that I pull from, history that people used to do that haven't made it into the FKT world yet. I'm like, I always make sure I'm very clear, like, in big bold letters, this is not a casual trail run.
Yeah.
Like, read further before you just go. Like, if you're just fast, there are other things you need to know before you go.
No, it's true, right? I mean, we were like super in the weeds yet. So I mean, I personally love this, but my listeners will have to sort of like dig the pieces back together. But even Killian speaks to that he is very conscientious of that he knows what he does and what he's able to do can potentially lead to kind of a wrong perception what is possible out there in the mountains, especially if you approach it just from a running point of view, right? I mean, you talked it a little bit, right? This idea of like, oh, this seems like a run, and then you go in nothing but sneakers and some shorts, and you realize actually it's a lot more than that.
Absolutely.
So let's take a quick button here and let's talk about your summer project, your absolute insane summer project, which was climbing in the fastest, shortest possible time the 100 highest peaks, and there's a whole description of what makes these peaks the highest peaks, called the Washington Bulgers list. And so tell me a little bit about how did you hear about this list, and I mean, knowing you, it made sense for you to attempt it, but just start talking a little bit about this.
Absolutely. So I guess I'll start with how I came across it. The first time it crossed my radar was quite a ways back, and it just came up in this thread of discussion of someone in Washington had brought up how Colorado has its Nolan's 14 effort. That's 14 14ers all on a ridge line, all together in an area. That's sort of like a test piece of that mountain culture, if you will. And it's super well known, whether people are trying to break the record on it or just trying to complete the challenge in the 60 hours that were outlined in the original completion of it. And so the person was asking, what is Washington's equivalent of that? And people were tossing around different route ideas, and someone tossed the Washington Bulgers list, which is this list of the 100 highest peaks in the state of Washington. And I remember seeing it there, and some people kicked some thoughts around, and someone's like, yeah, the current record's 410 days, and it's going to stand for a long time. And I remember like seeing that, and as a person that does these sort of speed stuff and sees what other people do in the mountains, I'm like, okay, even if these mountains are absolutely heinous and insane to get to every single one of them, like none of them are easy, none of them are on a ridgeline, the slowest the record should be is 100 days for 100 peaks. Like that's like seemed to me like a baseline. So like I didn't comment or anything or think much of it other than, well, no, that record's going to get broken.
Right.
And so I was aware that it existed, but like thought nothing more about it. Just went on doing the stuff. I think at the time I was chasing stuff in Red Rocks with running and scrambling, and in Utah with running and canyoneering in slot canyons. And so I really didn't think much of it beyond that. But then as I approached my 100th FKT, my 100th fastest known time, the question kept coming up, like, well, what are you going to do for number 100? And it came back across my radar then, and I'm like, oh man, that's almost silly poetic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do 100 peaks for the 100th FKT. And also, like, as I looked into it, it's like, okay, these aren't just drive to the trailhead, hike up a trail, do a few easy scrambling movements, and you're on the summit. It's like full on bushwhacking, backcountry, navigation, multiple days away from any civilization, glacier travel, crevasses, steep snow, rock climbing, like a full-on mountain experience, a full-on backcountry experience. And I was like, oh, that actually sounds incredible. And it had this element of being unknown. Like, it was unknown whether it was even possible to do these in a single season, because you're battling crevasses opening on the glaciers, and some of the routes are impassable certain times of the year because crevasses cut the route off. There's others that are in areas that almost always every season, this season included, catch fire and get closed down. You're just battling these different elements, and then, you know, the hit and miss weather of Washington in general, along with, you know, some of these peaks, you have to like ride a boat 40 miles up a lake to then get off and hike 20 miles up a trail just to get to the base of the mountain. And then you're going to do the bushwhack and the glacier travel and the rock climbing to get to the summit. So it's like all of these incredible elements that just made it this like chaotic project, just like standing at the edge of what's known and reaching into the chaos and going, I think this is possible, but now let's see if I can actually pull this out of it.
Mm-hmm. And it's a completely different effort here in Washington than Ulrich, the late Ulrich Steck from Switzerland. He one of his last big projects in the Alps was climb the 80 to 4,000 meter peaks in the Alps, and he rode his bike in between them. So he did it completely human powered, and then he also did a paraglider on some of them on the downhill. Well, of course, only the downhill. But in Europe, you can sort of comprise all of this in terms of logistically more of a manageable piece. But here in Washington, for anybody who's sort of dreamt of going high, having been up a mountain and looking at the next one over and thinking, oh, perhaps this one's doable too. You so quickly, once you get off the trail in terrain that is completely wild, bushwhacking and everything, and that slows you down, right?
Oh, it's like you don't have an appreciation for how amazing roads are and trails are, or even terrible roads and terrible trails that haven't been kept up in years. Like, you don't understand how much faster those are than bushwhacking until you go experience bushwhacking in the state of Washington. I
don't think the Barkley marathons would be possible in Washington State, right?
A lot more people would die during the event.
A lot more people would die.
It's pretty heinous, unreal terrain. I mean, trees grow on the side of stuff that, like, you grab the tree and then your feet are just hanging off of a cliff. You're like, how is this tree growing here?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But you can't see that your feet are hanging because there's too much scrub brush and you know, ferns and other green plants growing. You're like, I don't know if I'm 6 inches off the ground or 6 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely some wild stuff. We humorously refer to that as BW5, reflecting like the water ice classifications. You know,
Yes.
water ice 5 is ridiculously hard ice climbing.
Yeah.
So we humorously in Washington they refer to it. You know, BW5 is bushwhacking, where your feet can be hanging off the ground. You're hanging by a sapling. You have no clue what's below you.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, absolutely. I'm somewhat familiar with this terrain. Obviously, not on that scale, but I've been in these places, both hating every moment of it because it's just so slow going, and if you don't bring the right gear, then you really don't like your legs afterwards. They're completely cut up, and
so true.
and sometimes it's fun because if you know that this is the only section that you have to cover before you pop back out of above tree line and you can move faster again, or you know that this is a crucial connector piece that takes you from one piece to another. I mean, so the fact that you finished it in 50 days, that means on average 2 summits a day.
Correct. Yeah.
Which means the logistics to plan this out obviously must have taken an insane amount of time, because you can't really stand up on a summit and saying, let me take the next one over here, right? I mean, you had to have this planned out quite a bit. When did you start like actively looking at maps and routes and seeing how you would piece this together?
It was roughly December of 2020 when I started looking at maps, pulling up any GPX files I could find and putting them on topographical maps online. I started connecting with people who were currently trying to finish the Bulgers list and prior finishers, and started talking about what big link ups they'd known that people had done in the past or had done themselves, and which ones were worth doing and which ones were worth avoiding. And yeah, I just started, asking all the questions I could about what kind of terrain and what kind of, glacier travel, which glaciers were really intense and which ones were pretty mellow, and where the worst bushwhacking was, and any places they knew that trails were closed or fires or roads, fire closures or road closures. And that's where I started building out my plan.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the third component that a lot of people don't appreciate, especially on a project like this, how intense this is. Like you have to train your body for one to be able to do something like this, and your mind, I suppose, as well. And then you obviously have to have a basic understanding of mountaineering. You need to know what gear to take and what to do in what kind of environment. But then the actual logistical planning of figuring out what is possible and stuff, especially if you're trying to do something not just from let me just do one summit at a time. You have to link up. So I'm trying to figure out how to ask the right kind of questions in order to give people an idea of what it was out there. Well, perhaps we start off, what was one of the easiest ones, easier mountains that you climbed?
Of the 100 peaks, I think 4 of them have trails that go to the summit. So one of the easiest ones to get to was Windy Peak. It's actually the first peak I did. It's way out in the middle of nowhere. Really, it's a long drive to get there in the middle of nowhere. But as far as getting to the summit, just walking up a trail pretty much all the way to the top. A faint trail at places, but pretty open terrain, very little bushwhacking, just some downed trees on the way up. But then ended up making that day a 47-mile day by linking up Cathedral Peak, Amphitheater, and Rimmel Peak in the same day. So it kind of turned that one into an epic where we probably hopped well over 2,000 trees that day.
So if you say you turned it into that, was that planned, or did you spontaneously decide that the first one was too easy, you got to add more to it?
I knew that I needed to knock all of those peaks because all of them were super remote, but they were all kind of remote in this sort of big 45-mile loop. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, okay, either I can do 2 separate days with big pushes back to back of like 20-something miles, or I can link them all together in one day and just have it be a kind of brutal 40-mile day and be done in this specific wilderness area and be able to start moving on.
Yeah.
And so made the decision to be like, okay, going to go out the first day really hard and hope it's not too much for the body to bounce back from.
Mm-hmm. That's crazy. So, and then practical from a tracking point of view, you hit the start as you left the car on the first the trailhead of the first mountain, and then you kept it running, or how did you put the hours together, if you will?
So the official clock started from the moment I took the first step away from the first trailhead.
Okay.
And it ended when I took that final step in and tagged the trailhead sign of the final mountain.
Okay, and perfect.
So the clock ran continuously in between whether I was moving or not, sleeping at the car, driving on the boat, or climbing. Clock was always running. Mm-hmm. So 50 days of my life with a clock running, basically.
How did that feel? I mean, you knew you weren't under pressure rates because it's not a highly competitive FKT. It's not like you were running around the Wonderland chasing some professional athletes' time. So how much pressure did you put yourself under to feel that time ticking?
So for me, this effort wasn't about just like beating the standing record. Obviously, as you could tell, like I was well under the 410 days, and it actually made people question my sanity and like my methods, because they were already wondering whether this could just be done in a single season. And it's like, well, why is he pushing so hard right now, so early?
Yeah.
And trying to get so many peaks out of the way, because, what if he hurts himself or, whatnot? And for me, it was about what I was reaching for is I mentioned that, like, reaching into the chaos element of the unknown. I wanted to truly test myself to my very max, and I thought the 50-day mark was possible. Just from all the bits of information I could put together and what I knew about myself from how I moved through these types of terrain in the past. The bushwhacking was new to me. I'd never bushwhacked in as brutal of terrain as Washington. But based on everything else, I was like, okay, it should be possible to put this together. So I wanted to come as close to doing my best pure run at these mountains, that the maximum I think my mind and body can handle. And so the whole time, really the only clock was me against myself running.
Yeah.
It was like, do I feel like I'm giving my very best? Do I feel like my body can give a little more? Can I push a little further? Or if I do more at this moment, am I going to, break the machine and the whole thing comes grinding to a halt?
Yeah.
So it was all about just pulling every last drop out of myself, to be able to walk away with this thing with a feeling of satisfaction, this feeling of a job well done.
So you were pushing yourself in a reasonable but still average human insane point of view. But from a logistic point of view, you didn't do this alone, right? You had people sort of meet you at trailheads, help you out. I mean, I think just going to the grocery store would take up more time than 50 days to refuel yourself. How did you manage the outside logistics?
Absolutely. So when for those who are aware of how fastest known times work, there are basically three classifications of style: unsupported, self-supported, and supported. And with this particular effort, since you're returning to the car, there's really no way to do it unsupported, because your car would count as that cache that you're returning to. So self-supported and supported were the only two options. And in order for it to truly be self-supported, I would have needed to do all my own driving, have no one climb with me, or have the person who climbed the first peak with me climb every single day, every single peak, and set the record with me in order for it to not count as support.
Gotcha.
So really the only way to do it that made any sense was in a supported fashion. And I also loved that because it opened up the possibility, since this was my 100th fastest known time, to invite people who had been a part of other FKTs that I did, or who had been, enthusiastic about following my story so far with the other records, could come and climb a peak with me. Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't count against me. It allowed them to come even just hang out at camp and eat a meal with me, and not have that count as knock out my self-supported status.
Right.
So I chose to do it supported for those reasons, because I kind of wanted to, it's the 100th FKT. It's supposed to be kind of a celebration. So I wanted it to have that open as an element of the experience, to be able to climb with different people, to be able to see different people as I did the effort. I had my girlfriend did a lot of the driving for me. She helped prep a lot of the meals. She would hike. She was a superhero, really. She would hike base camp in sometimes. So I would go in on one side of a mountain range, and she would drive around and hike up a trail that was in between some of the mountains I was going to hit, and set up base camp so I could go with a light pack and say knock out 4 or 5 peaks. and then drop down and meet with her and restock and stay in camp, and then be able to leave from there the next day with fresh supplies.
I mean, really, when I hear that, we should just stop it right there, and I actually should be talking to your girlfriend, because that support effort is insane over so many days. My wife supports me sometimes at trail races and other efforts, and it's crazy. Kudos to her for committing to this and for sticking with it for 50 days.
Absolutely. I mean, she did have to run off and do a guiding trip of her own, which added its own interesting logistics to the thing. But for the most part, other than those, I think it was 7 days she was gone on a guiding trip. She was there. She was there either just in the vehicle or going on her own hikes or backpacking in with supplies to resupply. So yeah, she was huge, and you really should interview her. She's a badass in her own right. She's the woman with the most FKTs. And yeah, she's done a lot of wild stuff. So it's not like she was unprepared.
Right. Good. That's good to hear. So she didn't get suckered into, oh yeah, I'll just do this because I love my boyfriend. No, this was okay, I know what I'm letting myself into. This is going to be a summer on lots of miles of trails and lots of waiting in cars. Amazing.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, that answers your question. It was supported. So, and what that allowed me to do was to think about the link ups between the peaks in sort of a very pure, clean manner. Okay, what is the cleanest execution of all of these peaks that's possible? Basically minimizing mileage and maximizing efficiency, because I could have somebody hike the 10 miles in, so I don't have to run it 2 times to go back out and get supplies and come back in to get the next set of peaks.
That's super helpful. If you can plan this out, then you can really, cut down on a lot of mileage and a lot of duplicate mileage and stuff. That's super helpful. I can see how that makes things a lot easier. That's great.
Absolutely. I mean, it made it harder on the logistical end, because not only did I have to plan where I was going and what routes I needed to know and the status of the routes I was taking, but I also had to plan out okay, is this trail she's going to be on passable, or all the bridges intact, or this so on the front end. It basically doubled the logistics. Well, not quite, but close to doubled the logistics, because it's I have to make sure everything works out for all moving parties, all the moving machine cogs in the machine, so the whole thing came together. So I didn't arrive, out of water, out of food, and oh wait, that trail was closed, so she's not here. So now I get to go the next day without food.
Yeah.
So. It definitely had its pros and cons, but I would say all in all, the way it came together, it was a huge boon to the effort to be able to have it go in a supported fashion.
Yeah, for sure. So, take us through. I mean, number one, you're moving incredibly fast in difficult terrain. I mean, this is sort of an effort that's hard to even wrap your mind as a novice trail runner who runs an occasional race somewhere, to even try to understand your gear. You had mountaineering gear with you at some places. Perhaps hit me with your most difficult mountain. Where was it, and how did you approach it?
Well, maybe what I'll do is this. I'll talk you through one of the sort of expedition outings, is what I came to sort of thinking of them as. So on one of the particular outings, what we referred to as the Stehekin group, or the Chilean group expedition, it was arrive at the boat at 9 a.m., ride the boat until 11 a.m., up Lake Chilean, get off at Lucerne, the access to the Holden village, walk 12 miles up that road, which it happened to be during the heat wave in Washington, so it was about 117 degrees and humid.
Fantastic.
That was completely exposed. So walking, gaining about 3,000 feet there. And that was excruciating for anybody that's played in temperatures above 110 degrees. They fully understand what that's like, just sort of disappearing into the hollows inside yourself because you feel so hot.
Yeah.
And then that same day, ascending Copper Peak, which was a narrow climber's trail for about another 4 miles, and then some off-trail bushwhacking, and then some snow travel, followed by fourth and light fifth class ridge scrambling with a ton of exposure to get to the summit of Copper. Reverse all that back down to the Holden Village by dark, sleep next to a creek in efforts to find the coolest spot possible. Sleep there for about 6 hours. Then the next morning, wake up, hike for about 8 miles to get to on a narrow trail to get to the base of Martin and Bonanza, scramble up loose third and fourth class chossy rock where, it's just peeling loose and you have to check every hold, to get to the summit of Martin, reverse that chossy loose rock back down, go back to the saddle between the two, and then climb up the first the glacier with crevasses, winding your way, end running the crevasses to avoid falling in. And we roped up for this, my partner and I, and ascend up to where the snow meets the rock. And then from there, you go across the waterfall slabs and, the waterfall slabs were before you get to the glacier, my bad. So you go across some wet rock, some slabs that have waterfalls running down them, kind of picking your way through. Then you do the glacier. Then you get onto a beautiful, just fun movement, fourth, fifth class rock climb. That route must be well over 1,000 feet long, probably 1,500 feet of rock, to the summit of Bonanza, which is, if I'm not mistaken, the tallest non-volcanic peak of the Bulgers list at 9,100 and some feet tall. If I'm not mistaken there, I'm at least close. I'm in the ballpark. And then from there, the really interesting part of that day is that we needed to do the Bonanza Dark Traverse, which is about 1.5 miles of fairly razor ridge line where it's drop-offs for 1,000 feet on either side of the ridge, and you're just popping over the top of this narrow ridge line doing these fifth-class rock climbing moves, again, having to check for loose rock and occasionally finding loose holds and having to avoid them. But the interesting part was we arrive at the summit of Bonanza, and every report we'd read of this Bonanza to Dark Traverse said it took about 6 hours. And we're like, we don't have 6 hours of daylight left. So we've got to just get in a rhythm and go with this thing, because we don't want to still be doing fifth-class climbing and have it be dark.
Yeah.
So we just get in a rhythm and go. And it ends up being a really enjoyable experience. And we climb the whole thing in 3 hours and 15 minutes, a bit faster than 3:15, but for the sake of argument, 3 hours, 15 minutes. Tag the summit of Dark Peak, the third Bulger of that day, and then another glacier travel on the Dark Glacier to get down to a saddle where we pop over and do a heinous downhill bushwhack in the dark, down to the PCT. And it's a whole different mindset when you get in those bushwhacks where you have to be like, okay, we're going to physically just be moving, even though it's downhill, moving at maximum effort to not fall down and not hurt ourselves. But we're only going to go down 300 feet. You check your watch and you're like, okay, we have to have descended 1,000 feet. And it's like, oh wait, 200 feet. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to be doing this for hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that day turned into a 22-hour day, a 22-hour push by the time we got down to the PCT. And we started walking on the PCT toward where we were going to meet up with Ashley, my girlfriend, for base camp. And we thought it was going to be about 7 miles away. And we were just to the point where, when you're driving a car and you start to nod off and you're like, I shouldn't be driving anymore because your head jerks.
Yep.
It's like that, but while walking. Like that's how exhausted we were. We were like falling asleep on our trekking poles while walking.
Oh, man.
And so finally we both just look at each other. We're like, yeah, we're out of food, but there's no way we're going to make it another 6 miles or whatever we had left. So we just yard sail our gear out and pull out our ultralight bivvies and just crash right on the trail. Dirt nap. The next morning, we hear a, hello, and it's Ashley, and she's like walked out and she has some breakfast food and, like save the day moment, like, yay, this is awesome. And she's also like, you guys realize you're only a mile and a half from camp. So turns out, then it's like a mile and a half. I don't think we would have made it 30 minutes without falling asleep. So, anyways, that day took it kind of easy because the 22-hour push took a lot out of us. Just, not having eaten enough food, not having drank enough water, pushing that long, your body just can't keep up when you're moving at high effort levels. Even if you eat the whole day, you're still putting out more calories than your body's absorbing. So we kind of took it easy, walked the mile and a half to camp, ate some more, napped a bit, and then we just did the bushwhack up, which was another heinous bushwhack. We just did the bushwhack up to the base of Sinister and Dome Peak so that we could have an easy, just like start the glacier travel immediately the next day. To make a long story short, we did that glacier travel, tagged both of those peaks, went back down to the PCT, exited out to Stehekin, where we were able to restock on supplies at the bakery, and then had 3 more peaks, Flora, Tuption, and Devore, to do over the next 2 days, which involves some 5th class rock climbing and some 4th class. And then finally exited to the boat and rode that same boat back out to where the car was parked.
I mean, thank you. This was, I think, an incredible overview, especially for our listeners too. I'm trying to put this effort and you as an athlete into a category, and I can't because this effort seems so unique. Usually rock climbers go for something very difficult. They try to find the rock face with the fewest holds, and mountaineers try to find something very unique, super high up, super remote, and if they do go off, then they usually have this one objective. And trail runners, they usually go for miles or speed or something. So this is a really interesting multi-mixed sport activity that is sort of unique, and I can't really put it into any other box. Do you have, in your conversations with other athletes, I mean, where does this fit in other than borderline insanity?
I actually have. I spent time actually pondering this while I was out there, and I have had conversations like this. And it's like, it's this sport of blending worlds instead of isolating worlds, right? It's like, okay, you have to be very aware of your skills and strengths as a rock climber. You have to be very aware of your skills and abilities to route find from the mountaineering world, like on glaciers or on mountainsides or in bushwhacking. You have to be able to cover big trail miles quickly. From the like through hiking and backpacking world, you have to be able to pack your bag right and carry that weight for long periods of time and not have that blow your knees out or like wear your legs out. So it is sort of pulling from all of these different worlds to be able to do something that's not been done on peaks that all have been done on routes that have all been done by many people. But to do them in a way that, some of these peaks, it's like if you hire a guiding service, it's a 3-day trip just to climb one of the peaks. Yeah. And you're going to do that as like a half day. So just like, sort of reinventing the fashion in which they're done rather than trying to do something completely new. And I haven't come of a simple term for it. You know, I've heard athletic mountaineering tossed around, and that one's like, I mean, it's all right. It kind of captures it, but not really. Some people are like, well, it's just being, you know, an FKTer, and it's like, that doesn't have a good ring to it. So yeah, no, I haven't completely settled on something that really describes and encapsulates what this sort of focused effort is all about.
Yeah, you throw some of the expedition type challenges into this mix as well. As you said, most athletes, especially like going into the professional level, would probably start specializing in one area or the other, and once they've sort of made their name or are good in something in one direction, they sort of stick with that. Many of the Yosemite rock climbers you don't find in the Himalayas, because those are such different activities in their eyes that they don't really blend well, as you say, right? So it is very, very unique. Speak to physical low points. How did you deal with? I mean, you are super experienced. Your body is super trained up for it, so it's something different than you don't know how to deal with a blister. But I mean, what happened that was unforeseen? What happened? Did something stump you? Did you ever get into a place where you did question your sanity? Where you did question if this was actually possible?
I mean, I came on the front end to, you know, preface, I came into this seeking a challenge. And so when challenge came, I wasn't shocked by it.
Yeah.
That's what when you reach into the unknown, like, you're going to get slapped in the face a few times. But I was like, that's what I want. I want to have to deal with that, you know, game time decision in the field. What do I do? And there were a few of them. For example, I had a shoe company that was willing to toss shoes my way, and they were great. Like, out of the box, I ran 50 miles in a pair of them. And I'm like, sweet, these are going to be great. Like, I just ran 50 miles right out of the box, no blisters. I'm going to use these on this trip because they had great rubber. They would, you know, I knew they would handle great on the rock climbing, but they had enough cushion that I could do big miles in them, without it hurting my feet, which is, you know, kind of the crux when you're trying to do these big push mountaineering things, is like, what's going to be on your feet that's both fast moving and good for running, but also good on the technical. So I was like, these will do the job. I'm excited. But what I didn't foresee was they had a rigid heel cup design made out of rubber, which on, you know, flat to mild grades was fine. But I was doing brutal climbing, you know, oftentimes between 8 and 15,000 feet of vertical in a day. And so on day 4 or 5, my Achilles tendons got aggravated by the shoes, and they swelled up. And it was to the point that, like, each step was excruciating, the kind of pain where you can't think about anything else. And I'm like, this isn't going to work. This is a problem. And, you know, my brain is like, you know, at first I hadn't put it all together that the shoes had anything to do with it. I was just like, okay, Achilles pain, really acute every time I step and push off. I could be tearing my Achilles tendon loose from my heel. And, like, you know, that's like a game ender. Like, okay, if I'm mechanically destroying something, I have to stop. But then I, like, think through the design of the shoe and, like, how it feels. And I sort of feel like, okay, there's some pressure from the shoe back there. So I kick the heel down on the foot that it's the worst on, the one that was excruciating, and just walk on, you know, like when you're lazy getting out of bed in the morning and you just, like, squish the heels of your shoes down to walk across the room. So that kind of thing. Just kicked that heel down underneath the back of the shoe underneath my heel, and pain went away. I'm like, okay, so it's almost definitely not that I'm tearing my Achilles tendon. It's that this heel cup is aggravating the back of the Achilles tendon since it's stretched so tight walking uphill all the time. So I just cut the backs of my shoes off. I cut big V's into the back of my shoes, and I'll make sure I send a photo so that you have a photo of what I mean.
Yeah. We linked to it on Instagram. I remember you posting about it.
Absolutely, yeah. And, you know, it's just like, it wasn't like in my mind, I was so committed to the goal, so dedicated to the goal, that as soon as I had a solution that kept me moving forward, it was obvious what I did. And I cut probably $400 worth of shoes, cut V's into the back of them. Just, all right, this is what we got to do. Let's do it. Just boom, boom, boom. And for every mountain for the rest of the trip, I had big gashes cut through the back of my shoes so they wouldn't touch my Achilles tendon at all. So that's one example of something that could have been game ending. And then on day 24, when that trip I just described, around Lake Chelan, was coming out of that, and it was supposed to be an easy day because we kind of had to wait to catch the boat, so it ate up some time. And it was like, okay, this will just be an easy day. Hike the miles out to get to the boat, catch the boat, ride the boat out, and then just get near the next set of mountains and get extra sleep. But it ended up going sideways, where getting a hotel was a fiasco, and we tried to order a pizza to get some high calories, and the pizza never shows up, and Ashley ends up having to go down there and pick it up at 10:30 p.m. herself, because they're just so understaffed.
Yeah.
And so instead of getting lots of sleep, we end up getting very little sleep before the early start. And I was handling logistics as well, because there was a film crew trying to meet up with me, because this one of the things that's happening is this is going to get turned into a short documentary by Wizard Media, and that should be coming out here soon.
Super.
I don't have an exact date yet, but that is something on the way. Anyways, I was trying to coordinate with them in a way where it's okay, how can we make this work where I don't have to lose time on this effort? Because I was very committed to I want this effort to have integrity. I want to do my very best. I want to walk away from it feeling like I didn't compromise at all, that it was my very best. And so it was this really stressful exchange, trying to figure out because one of the problems with this whole effort is very little of any of the time do you have cell phone reception. Mm-hmm. Basically, I'd have little blips of cell phone reception for the few minutes I would spend on each summit. And other than that, no cell phone reception, other than when I was riding in the car between trailheads. But yeah, so I had this short window of time before we needed to go out to the next mountain for them to try to coordinate with me. And it was just this really stressful thing where it's I don't think that's going to work. I'd have to lose a day or lose a half a day to make that work. Or I don't know how the permits are going to work over there if you try to make me do that on a different day. So I ended up getting super stressed out, very little sleep, didn't eat until super late. And I woke up the next day just with my stomach upside down and in a knot, just indigestion, heartburn, couldn't eat, upset stomach, just so I'm out there walking up to tag these next 4 peaks that I needed to get that day. And I'm just not able to get food down, not able to eat, have no appetite. I'm if I can't put calories, each and every day I'm putting out between 5,000 and 15,000 calories. Mm-hmm. I can't not eat for an entire day. That just metabolically is impossible. At some point my body just shuts down and it's over. But I kind of kept the faith. I'm I've been in dark spots before. I'm going to keep moving forward, keep climbing the peaks. And we were about almost to the second summit for that day before I finally was okay, I can put food in, I can eat, I can drink. And that was one of those low moments physically where it's I don't know, this could be what ends it. The fact that I got stressed out and wasn't able to get sleep, tried to get a hotel room, should have just drove to the trailhead and gone to bed. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was an interesting low point on day 24. And then the final one was, I mentioned how Ashley had to leave for 7 days. Yeah. During the time she was gone, my climbing partner also had to be gone. And the fire that closed down Highway 20 all happened at the same time. So I'm exhausted, alone, and trying to figure out what mountains, is the whole effort over? Is the fire in a place that it's stopped me from being able to get to some of the peaks I still need to do? What do I need to do to get around this fire now that I can't just drive through Highway 20? so like my mind is doing all this stuff in an exhausted state. I end up getting around the fire. I end up figuring out that I can still get to the peaks that are somewhat close to it. So I immediately like start hiking in to go get those peaks. But I just remember being just so emotionally burned out as I like started that hike in, after like just kind of bearing the burden of like, what if it's all over? What if I'm, I forget how many days in I was at that point, probably close to 30 days, somewhere around the 30-day mark. And just be like, what if all of these were meaningless and it's over? And yeah, that was kind of an emotional low point, like until finally it was like, okay, first mountain comes into view as the sun is setting. I'm like, okay, we're on. I'm going to tag these things tomorrow. Game on. Let's go.
Yeah.
That was definitely one to walk through as well.
I mean, this feels super real and crazy. You're not a full-time mountaineer, and so you had to do it in a short period of time because you only had the summer off. You were a full-time teacher, and so you had to be back in class. Were you worried about that deadline? Were you worried about running up against that? Or did you have enough of a buffer built into that?
I built enough of a buffer in. And I mean, that was motivation to hold myself to a high standard as well, right? One of the added benefits was if I held myself to the standard of shooting for 50 days, then even if I fell short and did 55 or 60 days even, I would have plenty of time to get back to my first day with my students, no problem.
Yeah.
So at no point did I really get worried that I wouldn't finish it in a sense of, can I do enough peaks fast enough to get it done? Like, and I knew that even if I was way behind my 50-day goal, if it at all stayed remotely possible for me to finish before I had to be back for my first day, I knew I was totally willing to like stick it out until the very final minute that I had to start driving back to show up, completely sleep deprived the next morning to work. That decision was already made in my mind. So.
Yeah. Well, good. So you weren't completely under the gun, because I was just thinking about it. If the fire would have closed things off for a while, this could have potentially interfered with the first snow falling, and then you get completely derailed, because once snow is up in the mountains, then it could be over for months, right? So there is that worry that runs in the back of your head. Talk to me a little bit about food and eating. I mean, 50 days, you can't just live off of goose and granola bars. But you do need light stuff. How did you prepare yourself? And what did you take with you to sort of, what did you eat on the trailhead?
Absolutely. So a huge part of this game was, like you alluded to, packing as light and calorie dense as possible for being in the field, and then making sure I had a ton of calories available of things I knew I would enjoy eating, even if I was so exhausted that I didn't have much of an appetite, sitting in the van to just like stuff as many calories as I possibly could before I had to leave again. But the things I had with me, to talk about that first part, when I would be moving during times in the mountains, I would mix a calorie mix by Gnarly Nutrition called Fuel 2.0 into my water supply. So it had electrolytes, calories, and some of the necessary BCAAs, amino acids for rebuilding muscle. So I would mix that into my hydration. And, I was able to just, because, the Cascades are called the Cascades for a reason. There's water cascading everywhere. Mm-hmm. So I never had to carry a ton of water on my back. But I would always have a way to like mix the calorie mix into the next batch of water. On top of that, I did a ton of Snickers bars. I wish I would have counted how many Snickers bars I ate, but I enjoy Snickers, especially Snickers almond. And so it was something I knew I would eat as a prize for making it to a summit, or something like that. Occasionally I had salami or jerky with me for extra protein and fat. I found that my body craved something crunchy. So I would do like Fritos chips or crackers. Or one of my favorites was the Czech cereal when they cover it with peanut butter and powdered sugar, the Muddy Buddies, as they call them. Those were a great go-to.
It sounds disgusting being sitting at home, but I think it sounds absolutely delicious when you're out on a trail.
Absolutely. So stuff like that, I always kind of made sure I had something crunchy, a variety of things that were sweet, and then some savory things. And I found that would keep me eating all day because I would just kind of rotate through savory, sweet, and crunchy because I always felt like eating one of those things at least.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the big battles is when you're just out there day after day after day and you're always moving your body and you're always exhausted. It's like you don't feel like eating. So you need foods that you're going to want to consume.
Yeah.
So those were kind of the staples of while I was out there. And then anytime I would finish back to the car, I would have a protein shake, also by Gnarly Nutrition. I would do their protein and their BCAA mix, the amino acids, the branched chain amino acids, to promote quick recovery for the muscles,
mm-hmm.
to rebuild. And then I would just eat like crazy. I would eat stuff like, I think at one point I knocked out an entire case of Oreos, spreading Nutella onto every Oreo. It was just like a tub of sugar and calories. I mentioned pizza that we ordered. I ate probably 30 different packets of top ramen with all sorts of different things mixed into it to make it more calorie dense. And then I did a bunch of the peak refuel dehydrated meals when I did long backcountry pushes, just because they're so calorie dense for the size and weight.
That's amazing. I mean, some people say, perhaps me included, that part of the reason why we're doing these efforts is so that we can eat all this trash. Otherwise, we would feel guilty. But when you're out and about and you're in between trailheads or whatever, some of the weirdest things sound delicious. Finish us off with talking. We've talked about the hard stuff, the difficult stuff. Finish us off with talking about the glorious stuff, those moments when you hit the peak at sunrise or when things come together exactly the way you want to. Because we work through the hard stuff and we expect the hard stuff, but these moments of absolute surprise and bliss is the reason why we're out there. Tell us, what peak were you at? Where were you at? Was it the very last one, and you knew it was over, or was it one that you that completely surprised you? What was the highlight?
Absolutely. I learned a long time ago that even when a clock is running, a challenge or a journey is never actually about the finish. It's about the experience and the lifestyle you can have while chasing that finish. And so because I had that sort of knowledge going in, I was very keen and aware anytime I was noticing I was in a flow state, to use the common language, where I was just like in the perfect place, facing the perfect amount of challenge, moving through the right kind of terrain with the right views. And some moments that were like that, I actually alluded to the Bonanza Dark Traverse and feeling that time pressure with the sun going down to like move through this fifth class terrain. Once we got into a rhythm on that, just moving efficiently on that rock with drop-offs on either side and just like finding that rhythm and that comfort and like finding the loose holds efficiently and being like, okay, foot here, hand there, foot there, hand over hand across this, turn, step across this gap, just like in a rhythm across the whole thing. And that experience of just like flying through it and seeing ourselves cover this difficult ground so fast, and then arriving as well and like seeing that it only took 3 hours and 15 minutes. It was just like, oh, that was a wonderful experience within the experience. Another one, I mentioned how we climbed Sinister and Dome from the PCT. That was a day where we had to climb with the conditions socked in, where you have very low visibility. And so we're climbing across glacial terrain and on some fifth class climbing terrain, not really being able to see where we're going, just having to go off of maps and GPS. And then we climb through the clouds and get above it. And so you have this sea of clouds effect. You've just worked through the unknown, right? Like struggling, like, are we going the right way? And is it going to be like this the whole day? And like, are we going to make all the right decisions and not dead end ourselves? And you pull through and you're above the clouds and you can see the peaks sticking up through the clouds that either you've already climbed or you're going to climb that day or you're going to climb at some point in the future, and just this ocean of cloud in between. And that was a phenomenally just glorious experience. And then the cloud cover ended up blowing out shortly thereafter. And so we were actually able to see our main glacier travel for the day too. So it was like kind of like this perfect day. And that one was really good. One more that I really loved was we chose to do the northeast buttress of Goody. And that one's like a climbing classic, alpine climbing classic. It's pretty easy fifth class, like 5.5, 5.4, but we didn't rope up the entire time. We both were comfortable on that level of rock climbing. And so we're just able to you just get in a rhythm and just kind of hand over hand, foot over foot, find the next hold, for 2,000 feet, just up the side of this mountain that when you look at it from far away, you're like, I don't know if that can somebody climb that? And just all the way to the top, just kind of in a rhythm. And that was a beautiful, glorious experience, both on the route and then pulling over and flopping onto the summit, just laying there bathing in the sun. Yeah, those ones come to mind. There were more than that for sure.
Yeah.
Those are that come most easily back to mind.
Yeah, fantastic. Usually at this part of the show, the conversation goes around, so what's next? But I feel like with an effort like this, you don't turn around and find 200 peaks or whatever. And so what I'm reminded of is a quote by this French writer, and I don't know how to pronounce his name, René Daumal, who writes in a book, you cannot stay on the summit forever. You have to come down again. So why bother in the first place? Just this. What is above knows what is below, but what is below does not know what is above. One climbs, one sees. One descends, one sees no longer, but one has seen. There's an art of conducting oneself in the lower regions by the memory of what one saw higher up. When one can no longer see, one can at least still know. I mean, your effort was something that will be with you forever, and in some respects has transformed you. I'm projecting onto you. It's something that's so unique and so special, and will be with you forever. I'm curious how you conducted yourself, how you feel once you were back in your own bed. How many days did it take to get that finisher smile off your face? Or are you still grinning? It's like an achievement like that is worthy of feeling great, and it's not a feeling of smugness. It's a feeling of deep satisfaction because you set this goal for yourself, and you yourself, you worked through. Yes, you had help and things, but you know nobody pushed you to do this. How does it feel being back down, if you will, having completed this?
Absolutely, great question. So, in the moment I crossed the finish line, there was that warrior's yell of victory, and I think that came from the fact that it came down to the wire to keep this thing. My record stands at 50 days, 23 hours, 43 minutes. So I was literally sprinting back down the side of the final mountain through the scree and over the rocks to keep this thing under the 51-day mark. And so to rage through the finish and have it stay in that 50 days as the first word of how the record reads was huge. And I just remember just that feeling of flexing every muscle in your body as hard as you can and just letting out a roar. And then it was peace, and it was calm, and it was a smile on my face. And as you said, a deep satisfaction I like the phrase that keeps coming to mind for me, a satisfaction of hard work well done. And that's stayed with me. I was smiling as you were saying, it's something worth, feeling good about. It's like I'm sitting here smiling, thinking about it. I still feel this sensation of hard work well done, that I did something significantly difficult and I did it very well. And it's been amazing to see how the mountaineering community in the Pacific Northwest and in other places has received it, and to have it be well received, to do, what is perhaps the greatest work that I've done as far as mountaineering goes, or as far as speed record goes, and to not only have it feel good to me, but to have those that know those mountains and know the route also see it in a good light, also feels good. And so I would say, I do still feel satisfaction about it. And I've returned to life, and I'm still figuring out how to integrate it into, how just exactly what am I going to say about it to my students? How will I tell the stories in a way that lifts them up and inspires them? How will I tell my story to the rest of the mountaineering community? I'm going to have some opportunities to speak coming up, and then this documentary is going to come out, and how will I honor what I've done? How will I be respectful to those that came before me, as I go about, talking about what I did here and the showings of this documentary. Yeah, so it doesn't quite feel like it's fully done yet, I guess. And I guess that's the nature of doing something this large, I suppose.
Nah, I think so. I think that there's some truth to that. This is something that you carry with you. That's something where you continue to tell the story and inspire others, right? I mean, it's not about just showing off and telling for the dozenth times how great you are, right? It's really about telling a story of this very special place, this very special challenge, these climbers that have come before you who kind of put this together, and then your team around you. Incredible effort. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your summer, a glimpse of your summer with us. Tell our listeners where they can reach out to you if they have further questions, want to stay connected. What's the best place to get a hold of you?
Probably the easiest way is just find my Instagram. My handle's at Jason Hardrath. That's probably the easiest way. I respond to direct messages on there. Then I also have a website that you can find me through. You can email me from my website if you prefer the email as opposed to social media. And then I am also on Facebook as well.
Super. Brilliant. We'll have links to all of this in the show notes. Jason, thank you so much. I know you are a heads down, full on back in school mode. Give us what grade are you teaching right now?
I teach kindergarten through 6th grade PE. I rotate through about 10 different groups of students in a day.
Amazing. And you're doing PE, so you're like, instead of like football shoes, you're bringing rock climbing shoes with you, or how do you bring your hobby into your work?
We do. One of the first things I fundraised for when I got here was a 40-foot wide, 12-foot high bouldering wall.
Nice.
And so, I teach kids. I have 3rd graders who know how to rappel. I teach them rope skills, climbing skills. We managing their fear while they're climbing. I also do a lot of stuff with bikes. I got Strider bikes for my kindergartner and first graders to learn how to ride a bike before they finish first grade. I integrate a lot of my outdoors passions into experiences for the kids. I do a 6th grade graduation hike with my 6th graders when they're going to move on to middle school. It's found its way bit by bit, year by year, into what I teach and how I teach and the sort of experiences that I care most about curating for the kids. Because, I mean, we all can think back to how our whole estimation of ourselves was changed by something we experienced in the outdoors, experienced physically, and how we can come to believe in ourselves to much higher degrees through that forum. And I just feel so lucky that I teach what I love and that I have enough of an understanding of it because I love it so much to go, okay, I can show this kid how to better manage fear or anger through this physical medium, and be very intentional about how I allow them to experience that, and sort of helping them through, like, oh, see how this turned out, see what you did here. This is what you did that was really good. Keep doing more of that. So I'm super passionate about it. I love it.
It's brilliant. I've got kids, they're now older, but they appreciate, and we as parents appreciate, passionate teachers who are fighting the good fight out there, especially right now when things are so upside down with COVID and everything, to find a good way of managing all of this and managing the mental well-being of the children who are sort of thrown into our world, where they are just bystanders as this craziness unfolds around them. So thank you so much for all you do.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.